Hi, I'm Adam Hanlon, and I'd like to welcome you to Wetpixel Live. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is Aquatica Canadian company who produce a wide range of housings and ports and lots of lovely accessories. Please head on over to aquatica.ca to have a look at their range. I'm joined by my fellow correspondent, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And I'm going to throw in a big question today that I'm sure he's up to answering, which is talking about different types of diving and different types of photography. And I was going to ask him about what muck diving is, and of course, with that in mind, how we take photographs in muck.
Right. Well, I guess it's not the most sexy sounding name, muck diving, but it is a very popular type of underwater photography. Yep. It's and diving, and I think there are underwater photographers out there who are thoroughly addicted to muck diving. Yep. And for them, every trip they do is a muck diving trip because it is a very, very addictive and very productive type of underwater photography. And if you're into it, it really can be the best thing. So I guess it's probably easiest to describe what it is, maybe by recounting a little bit of the history of muck diving. And although divers throughout the history of diving have explored all sorts of different underwater environments to see interesting animals, I think there was a clear sort of realization within the diving industry, I guess sort of in the early 90s, but, people always like to say I was doing it back in 1931 or whenever it was. Yeah. And I would say Bob Halstead is often quoted as being sort of a godfather of it, where people running trips, particularly in Southeast Asia, made a conscious decision not to dive on beautiful coral reefs full of clear water, amazing scenery, lots of big animals, and instead made a decision to go for a dive in a low visibility, relatively barren dive site, which is usually a muddy, sandy, rubbly slope. Yep. Usually with poor visibility, with no scenery to see and no real big obvious attractions, but with the intention of finding amazing underwater animals. Yep. And plenty of people realized this was a fantastic type of diving to do, particularly for underwater photographers. And famous dive guys like Larry Smith and many of the people that were involved in Lembe Strait in the 90s, I think really, built up a momentum behind this diving, which continues to this day. And right across Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines and Indonesia, there are, huge, not just single resorts, but whole, locations, multiple resorts that are pandering to divers who want to do this type of diving. Yeah. And for photographers, it's loved because it's a subject-rich type of photography. Yeah. And most of those subjects rely on camouflage to live their lives, so they don't run away. And as a result, it can be very, very productive for you as a photographer that you're shooting cool-looking creatures that are also pretty cooperative.
I mean, this is an important point in that many of the creatures probably exist in similar numbers within a coral reef environment, but you simply can't find them. Yes, I know, I appreciate it, but finding them is much, much more difficult. Whereas, on a muck diving environment, they're perched on the sand, and they're much easier to find and much easier to photograph. So, so there are some unique creatures, of course, but
I would say that it's actually, for me, what really got me hooked on it is I'd been looking at all these, fish books or ID books for years and seeing all these amazing animals, but not ever seeing them myself diving on coral reefs. And when I started muck diving, in the 90s, suddenly I was seeing all these frogfish, all these weird nudibranchs, all these strange octopuses, and lots of other things that I wasn't seeing in those coral reef environments, partly because they were harder to find there, but also a lot of these are specialists of these open environments. Although muck diving started off in those sort of Asian destinations, it's very much grown into a sort of a global movement in diving. And there were plenty of dive sites in temperate waters and all around the world where the people are going in the water specifically to see the unusual animals that they can find in those environments, and not because that environment has particularly nice scenery or particularly nice diving conditions. I'd say a lot of the lower energy sea lock dives in Scotland, for example, that we do, they're very much muck dives. It's sand or mud across the seabed. There's no scenery. There's often limited visibility, but there are animals living in that environment that you don't see in others.
I think one of the things that's happened, it's possibly in Southeast Asia specifically, but the dive guiding has been taken to a new art, hasn't it? You know, this is something that certainly is an integral part, certainly, of muck diving. I think for a lot of people, you know, and most of the time, actually, you aren't finding your own subjects in these places. You've got these incredible teams of dive guides with a huge amount of biological and species knowledge that go out and find stuff for you to shoot. And that's certainly part of the activity, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a very unusual diving experience where you, as a photographer, have spent all your life, you know, swimming around looking for things to photograph and photographing them. Yeah. And suddenly you're diving with someone who's showing you, you know, amazing subjects that you would never find on your own to photograph. And I think that is a fantastic experience. Yeah. I think that whole hunting feeling that muck diving gives you, that you never know quite what you're going to see next. You're hunting, and then get the reward. I think that's a big part of its appeal as well. But I think for photographers, there's no doubt that the ease of the photography, the ease of the cooperative nature of the subjects makes the photography work, you know, for those people.
So it's worth mentioning. Okay, so photographically, but one of the things that we're diving on here is we're diving on areas of silt and mud, and this really is not somewhere to discover that your buoyancy control is not brilliant, because you know, with the moment you descend into the silt, your visibility is going to be gone, and that will limit your photographic productivity quite significantly. So it really is a place where buoyancy control and being aware of where your fins are and what kicking techniques you're using, all that kind of stuff becomes really, really critical. You know, but diving skills in muck diving areas is challenging, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it pays you off hugely being a good muck diver. I mean, my approach to it is I like to do my muck diving with a slightly negative camera rig. And that tends to make me slightly front heavy as a diver. That keeps the back of my body up off the sand, my fins way up off the sand. And I find that really sorts me out. But being really good with your buoyancy is really important, and learning fin techniques that don't stir up the sediment. So being really careful. You know, the number of photographers who get excited when they're shooting on a muck dive and their feet just go like this because they're excited, or they finish shooting the subject, it's beautifully posed, the next person's waiting to photograph it, and they push themselves up, and, you know, a mushroom cloud of sand engulfs everything for the next half an hour.
Or they turn around, swim away doing this at the subject.
Yeah, trying to get away quickly, yeah. And I guess that leads into the fact that this is often a group photography experience, in that there's normally several of you with a dive guide who is showing you these subjects, and learning the etiquette and behavior around that makes the dive both more fun and more productive. If you work well as a team with your dive guide, you will all have a much more productive dive. You know, and people, particularly when groups stay together for a few days, people realize, oh, I'll always let that person go first because they're quite quick. They just kind of want to see as many species as possible. I actually want to spend longer with the subject, see if some behavior develops, something like that. So that can work well. And I think, so, I mean, and you know, we could talk for a long time about the etiquette, but generally good communication before you go in, and then, you know, learning to cooperate with others is the key to making that diving experience work well.
I would say productivity-wise, if you're in a situation where you have a dive guide as well, you know, the guide to guest ratio becomes quite critical as well. You know, if you're in a situation where there's sort of 7 or 8 divers sharing a guide, then by definition that guide has to spread themselves quite thinly in order to provide subjects for everyone. Whereas in a situation where, you know, you've got two divers, say, to a guide, then that will increase your time on subjects. So this is where sometimes the difference between different resorts, holidays, packages, whatever, it may well be worth paying a bit more for that reduced guide to diver ratio in order to get more results. Yeah, for sure.
And I think also you can make a big difference yourself and as a group if you are all good, responsible divers and make life easy for the guide. They can put their energy into finding subjects. If you're all suddenly running out of air deep, or disappearing off in different directions, or not staying on a subject when they've told you to stay there, then the dive guide is spending their dive managing your scuba dive, and as a result not looking for subjects as well. So making things easy for the guide works really well. And certainly my experience is, you know, there are some incredibly good dive guides out there, but I would say that the majority of working dive guides are all at a pretty similar high standard. And I think photographers often go, oh, it's got to be that guide because that guide is the best. And I think actually you can make any dive guide good or bad by how you behave. If they're having to spend their time sort of sorting you out, they're not going to be finding as many critters as the other person's guide, who that person is diving really well.
Yeah, quite agree.
I think it sort of leads us into an issue that comes up in particularly in muck diving, is the fact that the subjects can't move, generally don't move, and as a result, there is the risk for photographers of harassing, of wanting to move subjects, because the subjects can't run away. You can't, harass a school of fusiliers, because they don't stay still, but you certainly can harass nudibranchs and frogfish and things that do stay still.
So there's two sides to harassment, isn't there? The first of all is kind of overexposure, so being aware of the time that you spend with subjects, and or more importantly, probably flashing at them, and the second thing is actually physically moving them, disturbing them, repositioning them, moving them from environments. All of these things are very much not acceptable, really, in terms of muck diving etiquette. And that's you've got a mousefish with you, Alex.
Yes, yeah. It's
Half-term weekend. Half-term week.
It's half-term, and yes, so she's enjoying Wetpixel Live, a big fan. But yeah, I'm just going to keep her here so we can finish off how we're doing. She's been very quiet and very good.
She is.
When it comes to the photography, though, the key thing for muck diving is really the fact that you've got these amazing animals, but they live in ugly places.
Yeah.
And I would say the one thing to hold in your mind above all others when doing muck diving photography is the goal for you as a photographer is to capture these amazing animals without the ugly environment making your photographs ugly.
Yep.
And there's lots of ways we do that as photographers, but it should always be in your mind to want to de-emphasize the ugly seabed and emphasize the amazing animal. And we can do that by going in close and filling the frame with the subject. We can do that by using shallow depth of field and blurring out the ugly muck. We can do it with selective lighting, inward lighting, snoot photography. That can all help highlight a subject and not highlight the horizon, surroundings. Yeah. And that's why those techniques are all so valuable in muck diving, because they're allowing you to draw the viewer's emphasis or the viewer's attention to those amazing subjects and not the ugly places that they're living.
And I think that in many ways that's the defining characteristic of muck diving is we're not really seeking to place the animal in its environment in a grand sense. We're most commonly seeking to concentrate on the actual animal itself, and obviously we use various photographic techniques you mentioned to bring it back. So in general, and as always, generalizations are not correct. Muck diving destinations are probably macro destinations, where you're going to spend most of the time with a macro lens on your camera. And I know, there is obviously opportunities for wide angle macro and close-ups as well. But generally, when you visit a muck diving destination, again, it's probably the kind of place where 95% of the time you're going to have some kind of macro lens on your camera.
I think you have to also go there with that expectation that you're going to dive in some pretty ugly environments. Yep. Sometimes they can be full of trash and that sort of thing. Yep. Or even if they're not, they can just be very, very barren, black, muddy, sandy sites, yep. often with limited visibility. Yep. And I think that, you do meet people who turn up at Lembe going, I heard Lembe Strait was a famous diving destination, and have no idea what's in store for them. Yeah. And if those people are carrying a camera, they very often completely fall in love with it, and they become addicted to finding, every last variation of nudibranch, every last, species that you can see there. And it is a very addictive type of diving. I think it's rather like a kind of, an African safari drive, in that, you're never quite sure what you're going to see, but it's exciting all the way through about what you're going to find next with your guide.
It's a bit of a treasure hunt, isn't it? You never quite know what you're going to find. No, and it's a macro, obviously. Muck diving, very productive photographically. So Alex,
she's just been to Lembe Resort. So
there we go.
All about it. Although she's more of an expert on the swimming pool there. She was actually had her second birthday in Sulawesi.
There you go. There we are. So obviously, if you search Alex's pictures for destinations like Anilao in the Philippines or Lembe Straits, there'll be lots of examples of images taken while muck diving. So
I also tag pictures muck diving as well sometimes, so that will bring up lots on my website.
And Alex and I run a joint workshop as well, normally every couple of years, at least, to the Lembo Straits, where we look specifically at muck diving and muck diving techniques. So yeah, a very popular workshop. So we've run quite a few. So thank you very much, Alex.
You're welcome.
Wonderful as
say
always.
Goodbye,
Thank you, Isa.
Wave to Adam.
Bye.
Big mouse wave.
Big mouse wave. And I'd like to thank our sponsor again, Aquatica. Thanks very much for supporting us with Wetpixel Live. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please feel free to add any comments about your experience of muck diving in the comment section, and drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.